out. He's a
Oh,
legend.
I don't know. Binsy's got a Stone Roses album behind him. I think that's a pretty...
I know, Dan's already said that.
He got made of stone in the back.
Well, hold on. You see, I've got my big issue with the Stone Roses behind me, but you can't see it because it's behind the Hollywood sign.
Yeah.
There you go.
Whereas mine's an actual John Squire, signed, numbered by him.
There you go.
Showing
we
off.
have 18 participants then.
Yeah, we're getting there, mate. We're starting to ramp up. We were just saying before you came on, we had a good session a couple of hours ago. Tina and I did a session on agency models, and really, really interactive. Lots of interest. We left with a lot of questions unanswered, so it was good.
Ken and Anne are on. Hi, Ken and Anne. Hope both well.
Hello.
Miss not seeing you in New
Laura,
York.
by the way. It's like the Brady Bunch, this, isn't it? We're all getting...
Right.
Giving you age away now, Steve.
Yeah. And what the hell are you talking about?
The remake. Yeah, but that was a pretty fascinating discussion, actually, Dan, the previous one.
Oh, were you on it, were you?
No, I was saying, I wish I'd jumped in, but...
No, it was good. It was very interesting. I had a lot of questions. It was good. Right, we're gonna start. People will still be dialing in over the next couple of minutes, but I want to get going so that we've got lots of time. We've got some great speakers to bring to you now. We are finishing up. It's the last session of our 6-session conference. We've got one on media now. We're going to talk about media and the impacts of the COVID piece on media. We've got some great talent from the UK and Chris Binns, who's going to introduce himself. But I've worked with Chris over the years at various companies. Very smart guy. Normally leaves me going to a dictionary to figure out what he's just said. Uses big words, but clearly a great guy because he's a Stone Roses fan. And then we've got Laura from Empower in Cincinnati. Again, I've had the opportunity and the pleasure of working with Laura on a couple of clients as well. Very smart, very on the button with what's going on in the US. And then finally, we've got Hollywood himself, Steve Abraham, the king of media entertainment over in LA. So we'll get a chance to hear him as well. For those of you who've been involved and come to these sessions for the last, for Tuesday and today, thank you so much for attending. It's been fantastic to have all the interaction. We'd hope that you do the same now. Housekeeping wise, try and get your questions into the Q&A. We'll be launching a few polls throughout this webinar itself as well. So if you can respond to them, I'd appreciate it. At the end of this session, which will be 1 p.m. Eastern time, 6 o'clock in the UK. We're going to stick around for about 10 minutes. We're going to leave the session open for about 10 minutes. Any questions that people have that are not maybe related to this webinar, but to the whole series, feel free to ask us some questions then, and we'll stick around and answer them. And that is it. Me and Tina are going to disappear, and you're going to be left with the beautiful faces of Laura, Chris, and Steve, and they're going to do their thing. I think we're going to start with you, Laura. If you guys want to introduce yourselves as you go through this, it'd be fantastic. Let everybody know who you are. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you guys see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Hi, I'm Laura Nix. I am a Senior Vice President of Client Service for a company called Empower. We are actually located in Cincinnati, Ohio, the Midwest of the United States. And why Cincinnati, Ohio is pretty important for a lot of the clients that we work with is we are in the heartland of P&G is located in Cincinnati, along with other great retailers that have mostly in the United States. Kroger, the largest retailer in the United States. We have a lot of really great talent here. This is actually our building in an area called Over the Rhine. But what I'd like to share with everyone is a quick overview of what's going on in the landscape right now with media consumption, how are consumers, what's going on with where they're spending their time, what the publishers are saying and how they're posturing in the press and what to believe and what not to necessarily believe, what advertisers or brands are currently thinking, and then just leave it with some key takeaways. And I know Chris and Steve you guys are welcome to chime in here, or we can just kind of jump to you guys, excuse me, afterwards. But, as we think about the lens we like to talk about when we think about what's going on with COVID, media, and the path forward, we want to think about 3 distinctive economic phases. And I have to give a shout out to Professor Mark Ritson. These are his sort of phases of when things are going to sort of, the phases of how things are going to come back in recession, from normalizing. There's a lot of other great time frames or lenses to look through. Forrester, McKinsey, Millward Brown, eMarketer. There's dozens of ways to look and slice and dice how to frame up the time frame. And some do a really good job of breaking it out towards generational cohorts or consumer sentiment and their nervousness and how they're entering back into the world. But what I like about what Professor Ritson has here, it's pretty simple and it's applicable to really any generational cohort or sentiment. And so the first thing obviously we're thinking about is this COVID crisis period. And globally, we know that it hit earlier in Asia, but then really it was sort of that mid-March timeframe where it really hit. And what we are advising our brands to really, and clients that we're working with, is to really focus on a lot of tactical measures or, sort of the bottom of the funnel metrics, because that's bringing in short-term revenue, right? A lot of our clients and brands need to keep, revenue streams coming in. So it's focusing on things like search, social, display, a lot of programmatic efforts for cost efficiency, and to be able to kind of make sure that a stream of revenue is coming in. But we don't want to do so at the detriment of upper funnel or brand activation. So where we can, obviously, we're advising our clients to safeguard their brand investment. We know it's not easy for everyone, depending on what category you're in. But safeguarding your brand investment in upper funnel or above the line media is something we are advising our clients to do. The other important thing is we're cautioning our clients to, this isn't really, we don't believe this crisis period is a time to redo your strategy. However, it's okay to think, we're saying, it's okay to think about your strategy and how you can, potentially play and have a relevant message. It gets a little bit tricky there, but this really isn't the time to change things up. However, we do have clients who want to take advantage and be disruptive. The important thing about, the disruption, and I think it was Tina who said, what was it going to be, Zoom word bingo. I think disruption is probably one of those. But the thing about being disruptive, obviously, you have to assess your risk. Where are you on the risk spectrum to be disruptive during this time? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then obviously, we're in the silo of promotion, but if we think about marketing and all the other P's from placement to price, there are other opportunities, and a lot of our retail clients are looking at the placement piece or the distribution, where it's buy online, pick up in store, getting creative in that way to keep revenue coming in. And then, of course, once we get sort of past this economic crisis phase, the notion that is there going to be a new normal. And the reality is we really don't know. There's no crystal ball to know for sure. But what history tells us is that it's unlikely that people are going to become more empathetic. And it's not because people are terrible humans. It's just that it's taken millions of years for us as humans to evolve, and it'll take millions more for us to change. That's actually a really good quote from Bill Bernbeck, who was a madman of the 1950s and 60s. He was part of BBDO. So what we're telling our clients is to lean into the stability of the unchanging. If you are really risk averse, let's lean into what is stable. And then, of course, the recession that is likely to be coming. We heard, if you were able to sit in on Monday, we heard both Alex and Mike talk about different scenarios and how the market could recover. Some of the things we're already, hearing is that for 2020, ad reduction is going to be up to 40%. So there's going to be deep cuts. We know this, which brings us to an opportunity to get really good cost-efficient rates and a few other areas for some creativity in how you're going to spend your dollars. So again, we're advising our clients to keep investing, try really hard not to scale back. This is the time, if you can, to maintain your spend or increasing it, and leveraging your brand and advertising efforts, because there is, seminal research from Bennett and Field talk about effective share of voice. When you can outspend your competitors, it's a high correlation to market share. So this is really not the time to dial back, because it'll mean growth for post-recession. And I'm not going to belabor these slides here, but this is really this is just a quick snapshot from academic research in the U.S. from TELUS and TELUS that talks about from the 1920s to the oil crisis to the financial crisis in the early 2000s. When brands continue to invest, they'll see the reward and market share growth. Or another way, simply put, is by cutting advertising, it does correlate to market share loss. So when we look at consumer behavior, and just in the last 90 days, now this is information in the US, but I haven't been able to cull together all the research for the globe, but in looking at information in the UK and Latin America, it seems to be relatively directionally the same. What we're seeing, obviously, where there's normal foot traffic is in essential retailers, as you can see in that the gray column for normal footfall. Where we're seeing a pretty significant increase, obviously, are in hardware stores, trails and parks. People can't go work out in gyms. They're getting stir crazy in their homes. And then, of course, there's the in-home alcohol consumption. We're seeing increases at liquor stores there. Then you can obviously on the right that the decreased footfall is really in any discretionary income. And that's where things like travel is so significant. Movie theaters, you're going to hear Chris and Steve in a little bit talk about what are people doing around entertainment and what are production studios going to be able to do. So that's where the consumer behavior is from, visits that they're making. But I want to level set what the consumption has been in the past and what it's happening right now from an overall media consumption standpoint. This is Nielsen. Again, this is in the U.S. and it's year-over-year data from at the end of last year, roughly 2019 to 2018. And you can see here that on average, Americans spend about 12 hours a day consuming media. It's important to know this is dual media consumption, so you can be on your phone and you've got your TV in the background too, of course. But this was almost a 17 or 18% increase in overall consumption year over year. And of course, the big area people are consuming is in orange there, which is mostly on their smartphone, where they're spending more and more time. And what we're seeing is, now this is a little bit different methodology, but it's still predicting the same thing, which is that the hours are going to continue to increase into next year and the following years. People are just going to spend more and more time with media and consumption. So what's going on right now in this COVID period, in the last 90 days, where we're seeing increased media consumption overall, and people have probably been having a pulse on the trades. Video consumption is up overall, social media, and again, across devices. You can see all these plus double-digit increases in where people are spending their time. And when we break this out into generational cohorts, everybody's spending more time with media, from millennials to Gen X and boomers. And the millennial piece here is important. They're actually spending the most amount. We're seeing the biggest spikes in millennial time in media consumption, versus a boomer. But you have to look at the total absolute value. Boomers have already been spending a lot of time anyway with a lot of media because they do have more time on their hands typically. So a millennial whose broadcast live linear TV consumption is spiking 35%, that's a big percentage increase, obviously. They're spending on average 20 minutes of TV. So now they're spending 26 minutes average, in TV. So, but again, across the board, we're seeing much more consumption overall. And again, I think Steve is going to talk a little bit more about particularly around gaming and how people are spending time there and those implications. So while consumption is up for consumers, advertisers are spending less in the marketplace. And this is just in March. When we saw things really start to hit, the very few media are unscathed and seeing these deep cuts, from national TV, which has had a steady increase in investment year after year. Everything across the board has really seen a drastic cut down, with the exception of local television and social are still healthy, and dollars are being shifted into those areas by advertisers. And this slide here is pretty important because the U.S. national television, we heard Michael and Alex talk about this on Monday about the national U.S. TV upfront. It's sort of this big bogey for the state of affairs, particularly in the U.S. and around advertised spending, because a lot of folks will invest 3 to 4 quarters worth of really a lot of millions of billions of dollars into the national TV upfront. And that's really going to shake things up this year. because just in this first half of the year alone, there's a prediction of a decrease of anywhere from 22 to up to 29 and 30% loss in ad spending in national TV. And of course, it's the reason for that is advertisers don't have necessarily the dollars that are coming in, but then from a publisher side, sports are gone. That's huge, right? Sports are just a big deficit. We don't see the political spending. And then, of course, there's just, because everything is shut down, production studios are shut down, there's just not a lot of fresh content coming in. I think I read something where Netflix alone says they're going to be out of fresh new content within the next 2 to 3 months. So that, but on the reverse side, from a social standpoint, we are seeing now on the left side, this is an annual number where we're seeing estimated continued increase in social media. No surprise, but on the right hand side, we're seeing just in this truncated time frame, just in March, relatively significant dips in the CPM. This is obviously curated, published information, but we're feeling this on our end as our clients, and we're taking advantage of the marketplace in a big way. And then this is both the UK on the left, and on the right is the US. And you can see, while the numbers are a little bit different, they're directionally the same. No surprise, digital time spent is likely going to continue, while linear, traditional, or above the line typical media will relatively stay flat. So what does this mean from, what are publishers saying? What are the media saying? Now, this is really around some of the national TV up front, but it's an important thing to think about for all of our media investments. And I apologize, there is a lot of copy here, but hopefully it's some valuable information. The big thing that everyone's talking about is flexibility, flexibility, flexibility. We heard Michael and Alex say, hey, this is a great time for procurement to really drill down and get the very best rates. No question. But in addition to that, flexibility is...
Sorry, Laura, I've got to jump in there. I think what Michael actually said was he wanted to see procurement go and beat the crap out of suppliers, but we don't agree with that. I just wanted to remind people of that one. That will come out on video. That's going to be one of those snippets. I think that's definitely beat the crap. There was some crap being beat.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. But so in addition to getting the best rates possible, we also want to make sure that flexibility is part of the discussion that you're having with the suppliers, because flexibility, we believe, is the new currency, part of the currency anyway. So what you'll hear media publishers talk about is like, yeah, if they're flexible, we'll move your investment from quarter to quarter, or across networks or across device. We're open for business. It's going to be great. But what advertisers and brands are saying is, that's great. I want to be able to get out of deals, right? Because we just don't, it's just such uncertainty with the how business is going to perform. It's so volatile. So the media are definitely out there saying that, hey, we still expect commitments. We're opportunistic. We're optimistic that sports is coming back. We've got thousands of hours of fresh content. And sort of taking this position as some of the big networks in the U.S. are taking the position as, it's our responsibility to keep the economy going. We've got to be optimistic. I totally agree. Want to be optimistic. But brands are definitely looking for this could be a time for a paradigm shift. And it really gives us an opportunity to level set what's going to be best for us as advertisers and brands. So again, currency about flexibility is incredibly, incredibly important. And I'm just going to leave it here with some key takeaways and then hand it over to Chris and Steve. I apologize, this feels like everything in the kitchen sink, but I thought it might be valuable for the group. One thing is definitely want to assess your risk. There are big opportunities out there, but you just have to kind of determine, some risk levels in what you're willing to invest in. Flexibility, again, is definitely new currency or should be part of the consideration, but also being nimble. We are seeing a lot of great opportunities, but you've got to be so fast. As quick as these opportunities are coming in, they're going. So you've got to make sure you're prepared with the right message, the right tone, whatever you have to make sure you're able to take care of great opportunities. I didn't get a chance to talk about this, but OTT, if you're not in streaming and OTT, it's something you definitely want to be really looking at carefully, because right now, the average time spent, depends on generation, but the average time spent with OTT or streaming on connected devices, linear TV, is about 30% on average, 20 to 30%, but it's only 2% of actual investment. So there's an opportunity to get in there. It's a great place for very targeted closed loop interaction. Again, continue to diversify. We caution folks against pulling out and putting all your eggs in one basket. Diversification from a media standpoint obviously helps with cost-efficient reach. Shoppable and e-commerce obviously is big, because when you keep the lights on at that lower funnel, we're seeing the funnel collapse in some cases where the middle of the funnel is sort of going away right now. Again, safeguarding the brand at the top, and at the lower end of the funnel is making sure we're getting quicker conversions. Obviously, look really carefully at local opportunities. If you're a national or a larger regional advertiser, local opportunities are a bigger way to keep things moving forward. Messaging is incredibly important. I'm not even going to wade into that. There's a lot of great research out there. Orlando Wood actually is published a lot of great information about, should brands change their message during this time or not. Leveraging the relationship with the media and the publishers is really important. We think relationships are just as important as getting, the very best rates. So when you work well with the media, you'll get the very best opportunities from them. Performance-based outcome guarantees. We encourage you to push your agency partners to go beyond just media currency, but to get innovative with the media for more deliverables on your business results. And that, of course, is where measurement is so important, to make sure that you're looking at everything, from soup to nuts. So
thanks, Laura. Really appreciate that. I hate to push you on, but we've got a couple other things we want to hear from. Just so everybody knows as well, Laura's going to share these slides. These will be available to people afterwards as well. So there's some great stuff in there. I just want to make sure we get through everybody. So Chris, what you got for us, buddy?
I have no slides.
Good.
Which so I'm going to come at it from the other end of the spectrum, but I will start with something that Laura said. She used the words paradigm shift, and I think the thing that we've got to be clear of. Sorry, hello, I'm Chris. I am CSO for Global Business Development at Mediacom, so I operate out of London, but I have a global media role. And I think the thing to think about is that what we're witnessing is not about a new normal or any of those kind of things, but we're witnessing the biggest social experiment in history. And the really important thing about this social experiment is that it is pulling forward behavior. It's creating a future shock. It's creating accelerated change. And those accelerated change points can be seen in 3 or 4 really simple places that everybody should be thinking about. So I'll point to, there's a really simple and unfortunate one about in the space of out of home. I'm going to start with out of home. So the interesting thing about out of home is that obviously pretty much all around the world, nobody's actually out and about right now. There's a very famous written up experiment from years and years and years ago of eBay, who apparently didn't decide to turn Google off, but turned search off by accident for a very short period of time. And what they found was that they had very little or next to no decrease in revenue generation. And I think there's a very interesting relationship between that and the out-of-home experiment. And I think out-of-home as a medium is going to end up coming under an increasing amount of pressure as people have immediately switched it off, and to see whether they see any impact on their brands or not, negatively or positively. There's a very interesting question there, which I think is worth some exploration if you invest in out-of-home. Out-of-home works really well for entertainment brands. It works brilliantly for a lot of youth brands. It works brilliantly for people like Coke, right? But the question of what happens when you turn something off, we very, very, very rarely get to see the answer to. And effectively, we've turned off access to out-of-home, more or less. The second thing is that has really accelerated. And Laura mentioned this a little bit, but I'm going to hone in on a very specific thing. There's in the UK, the equivalent of the Nielsen ratings panel is something called the Barb panel. And in the Barb panel, you can see how much someone is viewing individual TV channels. There is one TV channel in that panel called Unmatched. Now, Unmatched captures Netflix, Amazon Prime, console gaming, basically SVOD and BVOD. In the first 2 weeks of COVID, Unmatched TV viewing increased by 60%. And Unmatched as a channel is now the single biggest channel for every single audience outside of the over 55s. That, in and of itself, is an exceptionally good reason to be exploring what you're doing with connected TVs, what you're doing with product placement. If you're looking further forward in the future, there's a brilliant example in Life in Pieces of Hotels.com inserting their products into an episode. It's in the final season of Life in Pieces. I think it's about episode 12 or 13. It's basically one long infomercial for Hotels.com and their loyalty program. And the question of what we are going to be doing on the balance of how to reach people when we have accelerated change in distribution of reach, and how to make sure we're engaging them in a much deeper way, actually through things like product placement, is going to become a really big part of the questions we need to ask moving forward. So that's two experiments that we've seen witness to. The first, the switching off out of home. The second, a massive bulge, a ballooning of unmatched viewing, which takes you to streaming. It takes you to games consoles, which so far have been viewed as something for kids, right? But they're not. They're enormous. If you look in Latin America, it's a huge market for esports. It's got next to nothing to do with kids over there. It's got next to nothing to do with kids pretty much everywhere in the world, right? The third area is the unsurprising area in a way, but I want to talk about a couple of things that I think are interesting and surprising. And it's the area of digital commerce. I hesitate with e-commerce because it's a weird catch-all. There was a tweet released yesterday, and then a series of conversations fueled by Benedict Evans on Twitter, who is an ex-Andreessen Horowitz. Very smart. If you're on Twitter, you should follow Ben Evans. He's excellent. Which looked at the share of US sales that e-commerce is currently generating. And it's a massive hockey stick curve, which is at some level unsurprising, right? However, I think you've got to think about the question of, now that people's behavior has been changed, will it ever go back? It probably will go back in a certain amount, but how far it goes back and whether your business is tooled up for how far it goes back is an interesting question. In Latin America, this is my favorite app in the world right now, is an app called Rappi, which is in Latin America. In the first 2 months of this year, it grew 40%. In the first 2 weeks of March, it grew another 30%. It is enormous, Rappi. And you can get anything delivered on it. Literally, I mean, there are instances of football teams having goalkeepers delivered to matches in Brazil via Rappi. It completely changes the nature of what of interaction between brands and consumers. And I think how that whole area of digital commerce is changing the relationship between brands and consumers has been accelerated again. And I think we've got to properly understand what that means for us moving forward. I mean, if I was to look at where you conclude from there, I think there's probably three things that I'm obsessed by right now. The first is organizational agility. So we are running something at the moment for one of our clients where we're looking at search data on a daily basis to unearth trends which can be acted on in both CRM and digital media the next day, the day after, the day after. I would offer you the fact that pretty much no organization in the world is set up to act like that. And they need to be. Everyone talks about agile. No one is really behaving in an agile way. It's a very poorly used word. And actually the question of how you act at speed has been brushed over by most organizations for the past decade with the use of things like 70-20-10, which have never really been adhered to. So there's been no innovation and no test and learn apart from minuscule A/B testing in digital. Which brings me to my second thing, which is the e-commerce thing is not about optimizing in a digital silo. And look, there are many, many companies who can do brilliant optimization in the digital silo. But actually, what happens with programmatic choice is the value of brand ideas increases exponentially. Because If in the UK, 50% of all brand choice in a supermarket's online shopping system is from favourites, you have to be the favourite brand before someone gets into the supermarket. It's the same in an actual supermarket. There are on average 50 to 100,000 SKUs in a supermarket. The average person is in there for 50 minutes. The average basket size is not that much more than 30 to 50 items. That's one from 1,000 items or one from 2,000 items every minute. You have to be stronger than just optimizing in the moment, which would bring me to my final point, which is, and is a broader point, but I think it's been accelerated right now. Because Laura is right, there's been a huge increase in available digital inventory because people are doing more digitally. There is a massive, massive problem with that, which is that what people use digital for is precision, targeting, the use of data, and brands are cultural public constructs. The more digitally precise you get, the more culturally invisible you become. And actually, when we come out the other side of this, that is going to be a really big problem for a lot of brands who don't know how to take their place on the cultural stage, how to generate ideas that bring people to their brands, and how to use those ideas to convert both in store and on e-com. So that would be my thing, right? Accelerated change, huge 3 key changes that are going on: unmatched viewing, e-commerce, big experiments in massive shape and media changes. But really, the question is your organisation set up to take advantage?
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting stuff, Chris. Thank you so much. I mean, it's funny, you talk about is your organisation set up to take advantage of it. Our last session was about organisational structures and how they work with agencies. And I think we'll come back to in the Q&A a little bit more about that, because we want our listeners to really think about what it means for them as they go back to their organisations and they challenge their marketing colleagues on, how do we get more out of this? I mean, one of the things that you and I spoke about the other day that really hit home to me was that precision piece works when you really know your audience.
Yeah.
But the reality is, in the last 7-8 weeks, your audience has probably changed quite dramatically. And if your precision targeting and your approach for your brand hasn't changed with it, you could be firing a lot of effort and it's missing the mark now. So, that's something that every agency should be looking at, and every procurement person should be pushing those agencies to look at, to prove that those numbers and the data they're using is still relevant today as it was 8 weeks ago.
Totally. Precision does not step change growth.
No, exactly. So we're going to hand over to Steve. Steve's over in LA, as you can see, because he's Mr. Hollywood. So give us what you got, bud.
Hello, everyone. Oh, bear with me.
There goes his phone.
Thanks for that, Dan. Yeah, thank you, Laura. Thank you, Chris. Lovely slides from you, Laura. Obviously, I had a chance to take a look at those before. A lot of industry stats there, and a lot of indicatory sort of ways in which the business needs to start thinking about how we move forward outside of this situation they're in. And then Chris is obviously coming at it from a very philosophical perspective. What I'm going to be able to tell you, and by the way, yes, my name is Steve Abraham. I'm not Mr. Hollywood. I do happen to have lived here for about 9 years, but as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not from here. I'm from about 3 or 4 miles up the road from where Chris lives, from northwest London. I've been living in Los Angeles, as I said, for the best part of almost a decade. Have been worked with Chris for a number of years. We worked on a number of different projects together, also with Dan, a number of different pitches. I ran the Mediacom West Coast office, and I moved a couple of years ago to the Omnicom group, where I've been running another suite of entertainment accounts. What I want to do is sort of come at it slightly differently. Laura gave a very sort of fantastic broad perspective on what's happening in media as a consequence of where we are. Chris gave some really interesting sort of points. What I want to do is talk about it for one specific sector. My experience has mostly been in entertainment. It's a high interest category. People are desperate for it in this kind of the moment. And to Chris's point, I think one of the things that has been accentuated by that is how people are consuming this entertainment. Laura, you kind of said that you think human beings are probably not going to change as radically. Chris kind of had a slightly different take on it. I would say that if we use the proxy of entertainment, we're seeing that in its in its extreme forms. Behavioural change has basically accelerated what's been forecast for the past few years. I mean, when Universal can launch a film or have to rethink about launching a film only through video on demand and make more money in 3 weeks than they do in 5 months with their launch of the sequel to Trolls, it's telling you something about how they're having to pivot. What's going to be the impact of that is the impact that it has on all of the other ancillary industries that circulate around. And I use entertainment as a proxy. You could apply this to many other businesses, but you know, we're going to see a massive step change in how these films are actually distributed and how people actually engage with this culture. So for example, it may be that production is going to take time over the next 3 or 4 months as they work out how to create socially distanced sets to actually begin to create this product, whether it be television, whether it be film. But the bigger question is there going to be any places they can actually distribute it in the old school world? I mean, at the moment, we've seen articles about, you know, distributors, possibly AMC have declared that they have maybe 4 to 5 months worth of solvency left. Amazon was sniffing around on whether they were actually going to buy them, but there's about $4.8 billion worth of debt behind AMC. So do we actually think that those distribution chains are going to remain? So I think some of those fundamental behavioral changes in how people start to think about going out and spending their time looking in the usual ways that we're used to in terms of entertainment and spending their cultural moments is going to change. Going on to the second point of what does that mean for agencies and how we need to change and how we need to be primed to think about how we work with our clients who are having to modify and pivot. I would argue that agencies are probably best set up than many other businesses. I mean, we've been living in a world, and I talked to my agency colleagues here over the last few years of having to almost wish we had a DeLorean, for want of a better term, when we service some clients who want their answers yesterday versus tomorrow. So we need to have we need to be incredibly agile on how we can respond. So I'd say we are set up to a certain degree. But as you know, it's going to be very telling as we get into Q4. And I did have just a few slides as well to share, if I may, to sort of accentuate some of those points. Let me see what I've got here. It's very, very messy, but there you go. You're so slick, Laura, because you were already primed up as we went into it. So really, just a few slides to kind of wrap up my section, which kind of falls into two sections: observations, what's happening in our audience's world, and forgive me, Laura, some of this may kind of you know, cover off some pieces that you've got. And then strategically, how do we need to think, react as a result? And you know, you've both talked at length about this, but we are in a period of absolute massive radical change. No shit Sherlock for a lot of these stats, right? But, you know, 88% of us are working remotely. Zoom, and we're, you know, on that now, seeing, you know, triple digit increases in its usage. We know that travel's down. Massive job losses, and you know, all of those parents now working at home, which is going to completely change the face of this summer. But you know, on the flip side, biggest quarterly fall in carbon emissions ever. How's that going to affect pricing? You know, you've already talked about it a little bit, Laura. There is going to be a change, but we also think, you know, there's going to be pent-up demand by brands to actually want to jump back into it. We're seeing audiences re-socializing, so yes, there's going to be an impact in out-of-home. And obviously one of the major things there is lack of new content. But consumers are adjusting to this new behavior. You know, changes in web traffic we've seen as a result of COVID-19. There's all of these different ways that people are thinking of consuming content, coping techniques, at-home workouts, pantry meals, study with me. Just in terms of gaming alone, referring to what Chris was saying, it's seen a massive sea change. I mean, the World Health Organization has almost flipped its complete opinion on what gaming is and actually given it a thumbs up, because it's helping people to socially connect and actually be more, you know, actually find moments of relief in what is a very stressful time. Interestingly, you know, Activision's release of Call of Duty was targeted to get to approximately 15 million MAUs, monthly active users a month. This stat here says it did that in 4 days. It's now at about 75 million. We're seeing a huge sea change in how people perceive games and how they actually want to participate and play them. And I think the other interesting thing with regards to that is when you think about entertainment overall, gaming is the most polarizing. I mean, most people love film. You can ask anybody, 99.9% of people will say they love film, different kinds of genres. The same with music. When you think about games, the response is very different. 50% hate it, 50% love it. But what we're actually seeing in the gaming category is a massive increase in people who are now looking at their console in the room, blowing the dust off it and saying, actually, I might have a go, and enjoying it. So we could see a very different change as we get to Q4, with people being actually more appreciative and engaging more in that pastime. If we haven't all, if we manage to get through cabin fever, that is. So the ways that we may have to think about building our plans are going to have to change, right? You know, we know the sporting calendar has disappeared. We know the Q4 cinema slate is disappearing, and we know that TV production, or there's a bigger slate at the end of this year, but whether it's actually going to be able to be distributed is another point. And TV production is down. You've already sort of talked about that. So, you know, what that kind of means is that there are ways that we're going to have to address it as we are as agencies. How we plan ahead. Definitely key inventory needs to be secured or optioned earlier with consideration for cancellation times. Media plans are going to have to be tailored, you know, far more efficiently to this new point. Flexibility within budget, within channel is going to have to also be a key core consideration. How then we act in flight. We talked about agility a little bit. It's going to be critical. Monitoring market conditions and performance. We're going to have to talk to media vendors about, you know, our clients are going to have to take an approach of being more lenient with vendors and have that much more flexibility. And we're already seeing that with, you know, upwards of almost 30% of the industry in the US opting out of an upfront and 50% of budgets declining this year. And the other point is just working closer with your agencies to absolutely make sure we're monitoring all of those events so we can capitalize on those opportunities and advantages that should be coming out. So that's kind of my section, a quick sort of snap. I know it was
Thank you, Steve.
pretty fast. I'm trying to get
really good, mate. I'm like I said to Tina, when we set this session up on media, you know, one of the things Tina said to me from the very start, since we've done this, all 6 sessions, she keeps saying, okay, take it back. What does it mean?
You sounded a bit like Charlie Brown's teacher there, Dan.
Oh, sorry, mate. What does it mean for procurement? What does it mean for procurement? What does it mean for procurement? And we want to make this as relevant as possible to procurement teams. And you know, I think some of the questions we've got will help that. But one of the things I said to Tina on this one is, if the procurement teams aren't informed in what's going on in the marketplace, they can't have an informed conversation with their internal clients. And therefore, they're just going after what they've always gone after, which is, you know, nibbling around the edges. So it's been one of the sessions that I've been looking forward to more than anything else, because this is the bit that educates us. One of the questions that came in from one of our participants was around consolidation and agency consolidation. Now, 2 of you work in pretty big agency groups, and you know you've seen this and you've been part of this and you've played the game around this one. The question came from one of our colleagues. He said, as a result of what we're likely to see, as a result of all this, are we likely to see consolidation in the media agency landscape? Will Accenture make a move for one of the big 6? And will the Omnicom Publicis merger be revisited? And obviously, we've got an Omnicom player on board, so he's probably not allowed to say anything and just sort of nod or smile. But the rest of us can talk about this because we don't work for Omnicom. So I'm going to start with you, Laura, as an independent. What do you think?
You know, it is hard to say. You know, we obviously we're reading what's going on in the press, and we're seeing people getting laid off in other areas. I will tell you, independents are not immune to that. We are part of a global independent agency group, so we have a pulse on where others are, you know, are faring during right now. We feel as an independent agency, we have some more we're able to be a little bit more nimble. Yeah. So we like that flexibility, and we're not, looking at what Wall Street is asking us to do. So I don't know. For us, it's really hard to know. I mean, if I'm reading the tea leaves, yes, I would imagine there would be some consolidation. I don't know if it's in the next 6 months to 12 or 18 months, but I would imagine from a holding company, I would imagine there would be.
Yeah.
But that's just
one of the things I would say is it might not be consolidation across groups, but it might be a consolidation within groups, where these groups might be carrying not dead weight, but the extra numbers that they put in place over the last sort of 6-7 years potentially. What about you, Chris? The man with your finger on the pulse.
Wow, working for who I work for, I'm not sure I should put my head around it.
Yeah, I was going to say you might have to sort of be a bit tight-lipped on this one.
Yeah. So I guess I would say 2 things, right? Maybe 3. One is, I think what you'll find is a vibrant startup scene emerging out of it. which actually might be quite interesting for people in terms of capability rather than scale value. I think what you're most likely to see is not necessarily media agencies consolidating, but I suspect that the idea of a return to some form of full service, you know, I can't see how that wouldn't be an interesting thing for people to explore, because I think the real efficiencies might be there.
I agree with you completely. And actually, in our model conversation earlier on in the session we did last time, we were talking about these integrated solutions that are coming back into play. And, you know, we're seeing more requirement for that from a client side. I think the days of needing that specialist media agency, clients are saying, you know, actually, if we could get these closer together, make our life easier. Because remember, client teams are also thinning out, and they don't have the bodies internally to manage multiple agencies. What about you, Hollywood?
Well, you're quite right. I can't talk to the discussions around Omnicom, and I think Chris and Laura have been already given, you know, very eloquent answers with regards to the agency situation. I would say that the question could also be posed at the media industry broadly than just agencies. I think we're going to see a lot of consolidation of actually media vendors. I think the big are going to eat the small, right? And I think we're going to see a situation where we as agencies are going to have to be even more agile in having to deal with what could be even more challenging situations with a lot of very big players. I mean, they're already looking out there. We know who the winners and the losers are going to be. We're going to see even more acceleration of change within how vendors have to deal with agencies. We've already seen the demise of the traditional sort of TV salesperson having to repivot to become a complete digital salesperson as well. So I think it's going to be interesting times actually with the people that we're actually dealing with, not only just how agencies are shifting.
Yeah, look, I mean, honestly, so Dan, I think oh God, the printer's about to print.
That's his invoice.
Yeah. I think the reality with it is that if you were looking at speed as a point here, you'd look at the relationship between creative and media, and you'd go, the handoffs here are too slow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in a world in which people are trying to be more agile, then we need to find a way of accelerating that. And I suspect that actually possibly the issue is not necessarily media agency side there.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, so one of the questions I had for you guys is, what's the impact on creativity with the shift in media consumption? So, you know, we've got clients that pre-COVID, maybe big TV clients, maybe they were doing the one or two big things a year, throwing it out in TV, letting that be the lead, letting that take the brand on, and then maybe supplementing that in the back end with some digital content based off that potentially, or maybe separately. Obviously, there's a production cost associated with doing that, and that might be changing as well. But what do you think the impact of creativity is going to be if, as you alluded to in your piece, Chris, the eyeballs are shifting quite so quickly to either non-advertising channels like the Netflix of the world, or channels that you can't do a 30-second spot for. You have to think creatively around it.
This is the joy of what we do, right? So I think the question, if I'm looking at this from a procurement perspective and I'm looking at my agencies, the question I'd want to ask myself is, do they have the skill set to think beyond the 30-second TV script? Yeah. Because I mean, the 30-second TV script is, you know, with all due respect, is not that complex a thing. It comes from the heart of the brand, and yes, the brilliant ones are amazing, and don't get me wrong, they're really difficult to do. But I think the best work, when you look at the best work that's done by us globally, it comes from a really close relationship between media and creative, and people understanding the environment in which they're operating. Mm-hmm. And I suspect that if those two things are divorced, then creativity will fail, because it will be focused on how can I make a 30-second or a 40-second TV script. If those two things come together, then the answer might be something entirely different. I think that's where you get the magic. But it's good, you know.
I think we're going to see a really interesting time of where, and it's going. You can take a cue from the music industry, whereby major artists, so the deemed creative gods within the category were suddenly having to compete with bedroom DJs and bedroom songwriters, right? And you're suddenly seeing content coming from other areas and other inspirational creative pieces that were coming from outside of our industry. And I think moving forward, we've already seen it with how talent themselves are able to create, you know, really interesting you know, creative outputs from the confines of their homes. We're seeing more peer-to-peer sort of content being expressed. So I think agencies are going to start also competing with a lot of other avenues that maybe they weren't always competing with before. And what that tends to do is then it just increases the quality. You know, just because the distribution channels are changing, brilliant creativity is still brilliant creativity. And I mean, I'm seeing some fantastic examples out there of what people are putting out, and still great content that can be consumed, which we can take to our clients and say, look, this is still going to get a lot of eyeballs because the cream rises to the top, whether it's a 30-second TV spot or whether it's a 6-minute piece of long form that's been produced by, you know, a user-generated piece of content. I think it's going to create even more opportunity, if I can be honest.
Okay, so we just had a question come in that's sort of follow up to that from Paula. We did a session this morning with Claire Randall and Johnny Hornby from the AND partnership, and they were talking about the changes in production that they're seeing already and that they're likely to bed in. Paula's question is, do you think that there'll be a long-term move away from big production TV ads and content to lower budget but more personal content and production? Laura, you know, what are you seeing on this currently, and what do you think you're going to see in the coming months?
Well, I think that's a great question because it does dovetail nicely into the answers that Chris and Steve just gave. Just to add to that, not only, you know, do creative and media need to be more aligned, but so do publishers, because what we're seeing right now is the publishers are struggling to get a lot of fresh new content, so they're being much more nimble. And that's why what we're able to do is when we work with the publishers, we can talk to the studios directly and say, okay, we know you have an opportunity in live TV, and it's going to be at late night. How do we create something really magical in this moment? And it's not just the 60-second or the 30-second pre-packaged ads that we're seeing. It's definitely something that's much more integrated into what Chris was talking earlier. It has this contextual relevance that's part of the fabric of the show, and it's part of the culture because then it's more shareable. It has that fame strategy of getting people to share and talk about it. So in a short term, yes, absolutely think that there's the appetite and the opportunity for more cost-efficient production. Longer term, I would like to think so. I would hope so, but you know, I really don't know.
Well, I think it's an interesting point when you say you hope so. I think it's good. Every piece of creative has its right position, okay? And it just depends on the type of audience we're talking to. I mean, when we're talking to younger audiences, they don't want flash. They want real, they want authentic, and that's fine. But there's still places, I think, where a high-end production can sit well and still will be right for a brand. I don't think it should be dismissive in the sense that I think it's going to be right for what the actual product is trying to achieve, and it's always task-driven and who they're talking to. You know, Christopher Nolan, we know the kind of movies he makes, right? He's got a lot of pressure on him at the moment because he's supposed to be the film that's going to bring back all. Tenet is going to be released in July. It's when audiences are all going to go back to theatres. Yeah, right, okay. We know that's not going to happen. But I guess the point I'm trying to make here is there's going to be places for the big production, and if that's right and it behooves the product and the brand and the task they're trying to achieve, ultimately the results will be correct for it. And at the same time, you know, you can make brilliant creative on a shoestring. It's being proven today. So it's just what's right for the brand, I think.
You've got to think theatres are going to come back slowly. I mean, it's really tough to eat popcorn with a mask on. So, you know, it just makes a real mess.
I don't think theatres are ever going to come back in the same way. I mean, to buy a 5-inch television and put it on your wall with a soundbar is not cost prohibitive anymore, right? Yeah. You don't need to go and see... I mean, I'm not even going to say the film because the studio will be upset. But, you know, movies that sit within a sort of $50 to $65 million box office bracket, you can still get a fantastic home experience. The Star Wars of this world, the Harry Potters, the big... yes, we still want to know. But I think we're going to see a fundamental shift in how people go back to cinemas. I've
got one question for each of you before we finish. So let's take Netflix as a good example. Currently a paid subscription model. Okay. Everyone pays their own number, whatever it is. It seems to be quite variant. Any chance they're going to become an advertising model? If they
Specifically on Netflix, I would not.
I'm looking at Netflix as an example, more because if the momentum continues to shift, there's got to be a stage where they go, we can do more with this.
They'll offer up, I think, an ad-funded model and a premium.
Yeah, I thought that 2 years ago, but it hasn't happened. So that's why I asked the question of you guys. Do you think that's going to happen?
So, I mean, do the maths, right? If they increase the cost of their subscription by $2 a month everywhere around the world, it will make more money for them than advertising ever would.
Honestly, that's a really interesting piece, because I hadn't thought about that.
Why would you bother?
Yeah,
it severely disrupts the consumer experience. Look, I think it's a very interesting question. I'm not sure. I suspect they might test it, but it's so disruptive to the consumer experience. Yeah. Why would you bother? They don't need to.
Okay. What about you, Laura? What do you think?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, that's all right.
No, I was going to
agree with you though, Laura. I'm absolutely.
Well, that's what I was going to say what Steve said, which is if they do have anything, I think they're going to safeguard the quality that, the non-commercial interrupted, because so many people, they're changing the way they consume. People look forward to binge watching, and they're sitting down and watching one after the other, and anything that's disruptive really kind of takes you out of that theater of the mind. So
I think Chris is absolutely very salient point, but at the same time, I think they're also very greedy, and if they can have both, they'll do both. So I think they'll probably offer up a premium and an ad model at some point.
Okay. Well, look, guys, we've come to the end of our time together. Thank you so much, Chris, Stephen, and Laura for making the time.
It's been a pleasure.
This would not have happened without your dedicated time, and I personally appreciate it. I know Tina does.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm with you all individually in the near future. I will definitely put my hand in my pocket and buy you a small beverage
and popcorn as well.
And popcorn, obviously. But thank you so much. We're going to stick around. You guys are free to go. You can go back to your days. Tina and I are going to stick around for the next 5-10 minutes in case anybody has any questions for us.
Thank you. Everybody, stay safe. Yeah. Thank you so much. Really good.
Thank you.
All the best. Take care. Bye. Bye.
And those attendees that don't want to stick around, feel free to shoot off. Don't feel like I'm watching the numbers and people are disappearing. But I can actually, if you want to say something, I can allow you to talk. There's some function. So just
power.
Put your hand. Yeah, what power I have. Come on, James Edmund, you've got to have something.
Come on, Edmund.
James, you've always got something.
Oh, what? Got to chase the kids down.
Oh, Jimbo, I'm so disappointed in you. Broke my heart.
We did it all for you, James, as well.
Oh, bless you guys. Well done. I shame I didn't get to see your 6th session, but I've got a day job, I'm afraid. But,
I love it.
Really?
I'm lucky not to be furloughed. But,
yeah, what's that? Looking after the kids?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, they've been looking after each other, so I better go and check on them. But thank you ever so much for putting this together. It's been fantastic. I'll definitely be putting some ideas for the next go and get hold of these slides for sure.
All right, man. Take care, buddy.
Take care. Stay safe, everyone.
Bye, mate.
Bye.
Bye.
I do like Jamesy.
13 people still around.
They're dying slowly. It's all right. At the end of the day, we should have set this up as a thing, but it's been great. I'm still like as a separate session. It probably would have been easier to do it like that, but it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, I think people have got a good bit out of this.
And it's 6 o'clock here, isn't it, in the UK? So
someone asked where they can get the recorded version. We'll be putting the webinar recordings out next week. We're just going to edit them a bit, and we'll be sending them out, making them available. Apart from the last one, because I'm an idiot. What can I tell you?
Unbelievable.
I'm so sorry, mate. I feel terrible for that, because that was.
Honestly, don't feel terrible.
Fire.
Don't feel terrible at
all. All right. It doesn't look like anyone wants to stick around and ask any questions, so I think me and you can head off.
Yeah.
Let's connect. Let's connect next week. I'm gonna do some work on the editing stuff. Let's plan to connect next week. All right. And
Well
for
done
those
for
who
your
did stick
hard
around,
work on the IT front.
that's all right, mate. I almost got it right.
You did really well. Really well. First time.
Apart from that recording.
Take care, mate.
Take care. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, and
Hey,
you.
guys, thank you.
Bye.
Oh, can we make it 6 monthly? Definitely.